You are now listening to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Jeremy Hall.
That's right.
So, Jeremy, tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do professionally?
I'm 45 years old. I live in Canada, a little town called Paris, just outside of Brantford. And I work from home. I work for a call center, and I dungeon master for money on the side, I guess is the way to describe it.
Now, you said you're a call center from home. So, what types of calls are you taking? Are we talking about like 1-800, like suicide numbers or
Oh God,
something
no.
to talk people out of like bad
No.
spots?
No, like businesses that need after hours answering service. It would route through the company I work for, and then it routes through to my home where I answer. So, things like funeral homes, tow trucks, plumbers, heating companies, things like that need after hours, need their phones answered after hours, and they're not going to be in the office to do it themselves.
Yeah, when I broke down at like 2:00 in the morning and I called the 24/7 tow truck line and a guy came
Exactly.
out. Yeah.
Exactly.
Those
So
people are very beneficial, or I would have been sitting in my car alone in the freezing cold.
This is true. So you get me, and then I dispatch your tow truck.
So how did you come around to get to do something like this?
Well, my parents actually owned an answering service for 15, maybe almost 20 years. And I worked sort of in the family business. And then eventually they retired and the family business was sold off, and another company bought it. And that's when I started working from home for them.
Do you find that this kind of affects your sleep in a way? Like, do you have to stay up at certain hours where a lot of people will be spending time in bed?
It used to. It used to. When I first started working, I worked a lot of night shifts for mom and dad. So I was a bit of a vampire. and and then over time, seniority and whatnot, I got more stable with my shifts. So now I'm pretty, it's mostly day shifts I work. And I still work a lot of weekends though. So my weekend schedule is always a bit of a crapshoot as to what I can do and what I can't do. But yeah.
Have you ever had one call that's really, really freaked you out? Like whether it was like a certain incident where someone did something and they needed help, like emergency where you had to move quickly?
Not so much that, but I was working night shift once, and back in the day when we were a family-owned business, we were very small, very small. Didn't have a lot of clients, so things on night shift got pretty quiet at times, and it was not uncommon for me to maybe doze off. And someone prank called one of our clients, and when I picked up the phone, it's not like a regular phone, right? I've got a headset on and everything, so they're right in my ear. And this guy, in what I can only describe as a demonic voice, screamed something at me. To this day, I don't know what he exactly said. Terrifying to wake up to, though. And I basically kicked back. My feet were up on the desk. I kicked back. The chair swung out from under me, and I came crashing down. Thankfully, I'm in the office alone, so I did not have to anyone witness that.
You say demonic voice. Why should have been someone that's been smoking cigarettes for like 40 years? Like,
yeah, no kidding. No, this was like some sort of the voice, some sort of death metal shredding, just roar, and I don't know what he said.
He was trying to play you his mixtape, man. He wanted you to hear his band's new album cover.
He wanted to audition. He wanted to audition.
It's called Screaming Sirens of Rage. How often do you
Yeah,
get prank calls though? I feel like with an
a
operating
lot,
service
a
or
lot.
something, yeah, you probably get them a lot.
Yeah.
Now that means you've come into grasp with all types of educational people. That means you've seen the really ones that were thought out, the ones that were like, oh damn, that's a good prank call, and you've seen the really crappy ones. What's
Yeah,
the dumbest one you've ever seen?
we don't get very many we don't get very many well thought out ones. Most of them are just crap. Uh we answer for a lot of funeral homes, so we always get the Myra Mains. Is there a Myra Mains? Uh
Oh my god.
Myra Mains.
Who's
Or what
pranking a funeral or
I know what they'll do is they'll so you call a friend and say that you need to call this number. There's a lady there named Myra, last name Mains, and she's looking to speak to you. And then they call the funeral home asking for Myra Mains, and then you have to inform. I think someone's playing a trick on you, ma'am. And you have to have them spell it out for them. You have to say it slow, Myra.
You start
Mains.
saying this, I immediately think of the SpongeBob episode where they keep calling. Is this the Krusty Krab? And Patrick answers the phone. No, this is Patrick. And he answers it like 40, 50 times. Like,
Yes, yes.
Patrick, you work at the Krusty Krab. Oh, dang it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just simple stuff like that. I can't even think of the last time that I had one that was really good. Or you get young kids just calling and shouting profanity into the phone because they think that's funny. But
Does that make it difficult for you to be able to do your job and take it seriously when so many people are trying to like prank call and stuff? Like, how
no,
do you decipher?
I'm surprised that many people do the prank call because there's so much call display, and like when they call, it brings all that, it brings their phone number up on my system, and it would be easy enough for me to type into sort of like a Google search their phone number and figure out who they are. Not that I would ever do that. I mean, I don't care. I was a kid. I used to prank call people, but back when I'm significantly older. I mean, I was on a rotary phone when I first started, so I could crank someone. No one would know where
God,
it came from.
that one feels like it would take forever to try and prank somebody sitting there spinning all the dials. By the time you get the
Yeah, but
number
you couldn't
put
be
in, you're
tracked. You couldn't be tracked. I remember they brought out. I don't know if you guys had this in the U.S. You must have had this in the U.S. So we had a feature on Touchtone that was like, I think it was Star. I want to say Star 69. As ridiculous as
Star
that sounds,
67 was for us.
and it would give you the number that just called you. Is
It
that
would
what it would?
it
Yeah.
would it would say like or say restricted or something. Like I got a restricted call the other day. It said unknown caller. I was like, you fucking think I'm answering that?
I get unknown caller all the time on my cell phone, and I don't answer it. Interestingly enough, a lot of like after hours service people that I work with, they have their line blanked like that so that if they call a client, the client can't call them back directly. They have to go back through the service because they don't want to be woken, they don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night by strangers. They'd rather it come through the answering service and then we dispatch it out. But
Do you find it
yeah,
fascinating how like it seems like when you get like a toll number or some type of caller, they make it very, very close to a number that when it pops up on your phone, it feels like you know what that number is. Like it's someone close, like maybe a
yeah.
family member whose phone you forgot to save.
Or they clone it. They get a local area code even though they're not calling from, the
Isn't
call
that
center's not local.
illegal though? Like I don't know the whole logistics behind that because they always call at the most inconvenient times.
Of course, of course. And just to be clear, I'm not one of those people. I'm not someone who's I don't do outbound telemarketing. I am strictly hired by a client to answer inbound calls only. So I couldn't imagine being one of these people that have to make those outbound cold calls. They're it's such a scummy job. Nobody ever wants that phone call, right? Nobody ever wants to pick up the phone and go, yeah, I want to buy your product. I mean, if I want to buy a product, I'll go looking to buy the product. I don't need a phone call to, I don't,
I always experience these at like the worst times. Like I'm taking a crap or something, and next
exactly, exactly.
I get a phone call, and I think it's going to be a robot, like it always is. Like, hi, is Jessica there? I'm like, no, this is Robbie. They're like, well, maybe you can help me. I'm like, if you're looking for Jessica, I can't help you, man.
No,
I'm pretty
exactly.
sure we probably are two
And
completely.
robocalling, like, so I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients that I answer for now. And so we have tons of phone numbers. So a robocall will, uh, they'll get a string of phone numbers and they'll just start running through that string of phone numbers. So you get all kinds of like, most common robocall is that your business is not being utilized on Google properly, and we can help you get your Google uh, placement better. Hundreds and hundreds of those automated phone calls come through. I can almost tell you that if I could take out all the robocalls in my day, more than prank calls are few and far between, but all if I could take out all the robocalls in my day, I would be doing probably half the amount of work that I do now.
I feel like with prank calls, though, you can have a little bit more fun because it's probably just a kid who's just trying to like mess around with his friend or
Oh
something.
yeah, oh yeah.
I
In
mean,
all honesty, the prank calls don't bother me. Half the time they give me a chuckle, or I just go, "Get more original, guys. Come on, do better than that."
I've
But
heard the whole variety. You can't give me
yeah,
my
exactly,
refrigerator running.
exactly. But the robocalls drive me crazy, just crazy. Picking up the phone and it's not even a real person. It's just
Yeah, I made a mistake one time of that robocall coming in, and I yelled at the person. I'm like, "No, because I'm taking a shit." And next thing you know, the woman goes, "I'm so sorry for disrupting you." I was like, "Wait a minute, are you a real person?" She's like, "Yes." I'm like, "I feel so bad. Please sell me whatever you're selling me. I'll buy 50."
But don't you feel that reaction comes out of robocalls harassing so much that you just go into automatic sort of, oh, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, man. What are you talking about?
Okay.
I think I've done it like twice already.
I haven't even noticed. So you just want to tell them to fuck off. Like you're just like,
Yeah.
enough of this shit. I don't even want to deal with it. So yeah, no robocalls. Oh, I hate them.
I
Hate
just
them.
usually put my grandfather on there with a robocall. Like he comes in from fixing the lawnmower or something. He's all pissed off, and like I'll get one of those calls or something. I'm like, "Yo, answer this," and he just starts talking to the robot. I'm like, "Let all your emotions out." He's going, "You son of a bitch, can't even cut my grass," and he's going off on this machine. And it's like when you start talking, the machine stops for a second, so it can like make it like a one-on-one type conversation. You know, one person talks, the other person comes in.
Yes.
And then it starts going back, starts selling him a product. He just starts going off again. I'm like, this is so much better. He's not taking it out on me. He's just yelling at the phone. I can leave him on there forever.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Eventually, he's on the phone call for like 2 hours, thinking he's with talking to a cousin from Delmar or something. I'm like, all right. But I mean, it brings in a whole new world too, because I mean that is a lost art. I feel like there's not too many prank calls anymore. I'd rather get a prank call nowadays than a robocall. I had just recently had this thing happen on my phone. This person texted me, and it was a number one digit off of mine. It was just one less than mine at the ending, and they say, "Hey, I'm your number neighbor. Nice to meet you." And then we just had like a quick, brief little chat, and that was it.
Oh, that's not bad.
It was just the weirdest thing in the world.
It
Like
is a little strange though. I mean, who does that?
it's really weird when you like, yeah, because if you really want to talk about like not talking to strangers and then like you're just straight up texting them like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from here. But how open you are with that information as well.
Yeah. Speaking of who does that, this is probably my biggest pet peeve, even more than robocalls. Someone will come home from work and they'll see a number on their call display, but the person didn't leave a message. So then they'll call back. It's now after hours, so they get me. So it comes through me. They're like, "Hey, did you call me today?" Like, "No, I didn't call you."
Dude, that's another thing when
I'm
you
like,
get
the business might have called you, but if they didn't leave a message, I'm sure it's not urgent. They'll get back to you. But just these people get so irate with me because I don't know what they called about. I mean, like, maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe, or it just wasn't urgent. So they didn't reach you. They'll call you back, I'm sure, if they need to. But people get so, I'm like, are people so desperate for some kind of an interaction that when they get home and they see a number on their phone and there's no message left, they just there's an un um there's this urge that has to be that has to be dealt with to find out who that was and what it was about. I mean, if I get home and there's a number on my call display and they didn't leave a message, then I just go about my day. I'm like, oh well, good. One less thing I have to deal with.
I've been trying to get like some medical stuff set up, and like I always have to leave a message waiting for them to call me back, and they don't call me back for a few days later. But then I get a call on my phone, and after like 2 seconds of ringing, it hangs up. So I call it back, and next thing I know, it's like, "Hello." I'm like, "Hi, this number called me," and I'm like, "I never called you, man." I'm like, "What?" like this number, I'm calling it legit, like right now, I'm calling it
Mhm.
right back. So it's like, you called me. Nah, man, I didn't do that. I'm
But
like,
they can clone, right? Like they can clone that number.
that's what I'm
So
saying. How is that not illegal?
when I had when I would with the family business, I was responsible for setting up new phone numbers and that, and we would occasionally get a phone number that someone had essentially hijacked. So they were making these outbound calls using that number to show up on call display. So we would have all kinds of people calling back. Like I think it was a plumber that we were answering for, and someone was calling doing some sort of scam telemarketing, had nothing to do with plumbing, and all these people were calling back the plumber going, you just called me. And I'm like, no, there's something going on here. This is not and sure enough, you get in contact with the phone company and they can do some tracking down, and you have no recourse but to change. The plumber has to essentially, not his business line, but we have to change the number that he forwards his business line to, because that call forwarding number that he's using is the one that's been hijacked. It's just so irritating, so irritating.
My cousin downloaded this app for his phone, and he was trying to tell me about it with all the, because he saw how like I was getting multiples of these calls a day, just people calling, hanging up, and I'd call back, and there would be like some other person. It wouldn't be the person that called me originally, the machine or whatever.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
when you call, it's like Google answers it for you, and it's like hello, and it starts giving like an automated response. And then when they start talking, it shows up on his front screen about, oh, someone's calling me. Hang on a second, let me screen it. And he screens it, and as it's coming through, the person's saying, and if it's someone that he knows, he picks it up and starts talking to him. But if it's a machine, he just hits ignore and it deletes it. But
Hmm.
I started seeing with the rise of the like the automated phone calls and stuff, I started seeing things on the internet and things such as like commercials where people are like, you ever get this happen to you? And then it's your iPhone ringing or whatever. And then it's like, oh, and someone trying to sell you something. They found a way to be able to track that number and annihilate it and make sure that it can never call you again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is like that's definitely a benefit. I mean, that's an app I have to look more into, because I swear, like we said, we get them at the worst times. Like you're trying to carry 80 pounds of groceries into your house all in one trip, because if anything can't be done in one trip, it just gets left out in the car. I don't care if it's ice cream, it's all coming inside. So I'll be more than happy to break my arms to carry all my groceries in. But like I'm carrying, and all I hear is my phone start going off. I'm like, what is it? What is it? What happens if this is work? What happens if this is a family emergency and I miss it? And next thing I know, I put some stuff down, look, hello, hi. Let me tell you about homeowners insurance. I'm like, let me tell you how I just dropped my Ben and Jerry's on the fucking floor.
Yeah. It's like one of the most annoying things to have happen, I think.
So I do want to talk about, because you do this podcast as well called Old Men Rolling Dice. So
We do.
please explain to me, the first of all, where the name came from and then what it's about.
So Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop gaming is sort of it's my other half of my life, I guess. Family's in there too somewhere, but so I do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. There's all kinds of Dungeons and Dragons podcasts and live plays and things like that out there, and I play with a group of guys. We're all old. I would say the youngest. I think our youngest player is like 40. Our oldest is probably in his 50s. So there's probably a lot of 40 and 50-year-old men out there going like, "Don't call me old." That's fair. That's fair. I don't like to be old either. But
Middle
compared to
aged, middle aged.
exactly, but compared to sort of the gaming community, I'm finding myself being at the older end of the scale more times than not. So we were sitting around playing, and we were having these games where uh, I was laughing so hard, like my sides were sore by the time we were done. And I got to thinking, I'm like, could this just is this just because it's me and my friends and they're all inside jokes and things like that, or is there something maybe a little entertaining here? So we decided we would record some sessions. I as exciting as I maybe make answering phones sound, I would not say that it's something that is my passion. I've been doing it a long time, and I wanted to change. I wanted to learn something new. So podcasting sort of became this thing that I would throw myself into and see if I could figure out. And I had this group of guys that I was playing D&D with on a regular basis that I thought, these are the perfect guinea pigs. They make me laugh. So maybe other people will find them entertaining too. So we had to come up with a name, and we just said, we're a bunch of old men just sitting around rolling dice. And then I was like, wait a minute, that's exactly what we are. So Old Men Rolling Dice came out of that. And yeah, from there, we threw the podcast together. I learned a little bit about hosting, where you can host it and how you record it. And I gave myself a crash course on, we use Audacity. I don't know if you're familiar with that program, but
Yeah, well, where'd you get your fascination for Dungeons and Dragons from? Like, did you have this as
yeah,
like a kid?
that's a good question. I've been thinking about that a little bit lately, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's my personality, but when I was 10 years old, my friend and I were bored one summer, and his babysitter suggested, have you played Dungeons and Dragons before? And this would have been in 1984. So the game, I think Dungeons and Dragons came out in 74. So it had been around a little while. Anyway, she took us down to the library, and we got a Dungeons and Dragons book. And before long, my friend was running us through Dungeons and Dragons games, and it just, I don't know what it is about the game. It just got into me. I needed to. It was sort of it became an obsession, like just constantly thinking about stories for the game, and I mean, it's addictive from the sense that, like, you're getting together with friends, and it's generally a good time. I can't think
Yeah,
of many.
nobody's being forced to do it too. See,
Exactly,
I never
exactly.
have had the chance to play a Dungeons and Dragons game. I've been invited to a lot of them because it's crazy to see how far my friends enjoy it, even though they're not the type of people you would ever associate playing Dungeons and Dragons. I think
Hmm.
that's changed so much nowadays with how
Oh, big
popular
time.
the game has gotten. A lot of people that you wouldn't even consider playing Dungeons and Dragons are now playing Dungeons and Dragons.
No, you're right. You're
I
right.
think it's because they started to realize that there's something more to it than just like the stereotypical
There
nerd
was a
playing the
stigma
game.
to it. There was a stigma to it. I mean, when I was in high school, I don't want to say that I was the sort of the prototypical nerd. I was. I certainly was. I like to use the term geek from the standpoint of, I was geeky in that I had um, these sort of fandoms that I belonged to, and I was not just a casual fan. I was a big fan. Like, Star Wars has always been a big thing for me. Role playing games have always been a big thing for me. So these were sort of little niches that I was into. But I mean, like, I played football. I was captain of my football team. I was not sort of. It's funny that I'm even having to defend this. That I'm like trying to think of, like, I'm not the nerd, but I'm not a nerd, but I'm a nerd. So
Well, you're passionate about something and you want to be surrounded by it. I can understand that. I mean, for
yeah,
me, I only had a Dungeons and Dragons poster in my room when I was a kid, only because there's a bunch of mythological monsters on there that they just
sure.
look cool. Dragons, all that stuff always fascinated me. I was very fascinated with medieval games. That's why I get really interested when someone does a D&D podcast or someone plays Dungeons and Dragons, because it's a group hang. It is
It
literally
is.
like
It
you
is.
you would consider like, oh, it's a bunch of you guys wearing your black rimmed glasses and rolling 20-sided dice and throwing it on the
Hmm.
table. And then, oh, you sunk my battleship. No, it's not. You can have beers in front of you. You can have Doritos,
Yeah,
order pizza.
absolutely.
It's a group hang. And I think that's why a lot of people turn it into a podcast, because they realize the fun that they were having with their group was something they wanted to share with other people, because they felt like it was going to bring more people in onto their group. And that's what your podcast does as well. I mean, you're bringing people into your group hang. You're making them feel like part of your group. I mean, it's weird to see different podcasters that do Dungeons and Dragons, where they started from it and what they kind of talk about. It seems like a lot of them kind of go off like a dungeon master's story, and they just record the whole story and keep it going and going and going. Is that how you try and do yours?
Well, we do two. There's two shows we do. So we do our live play, which essentially is us. We get together, we play the game. I put a microphone on the table, and you get to hear everything that goes on at our table. Whether it be us just joking around, or rolling the dice, or getting into character and role playing a bit. So you get to hear that. And then we do another show that we haven't even named it. We just call it DM Chat right now, where I basically do a little bit like what you did with with me, where I just approach people that I think would be interesting to chat about the game with, and uh, and ask them if they'll come out and talk. And then usually we find like a solid topic. So we're gonna we had one guest come on. We're going to talk about random encounters in the game. Had another person come on and talked about sort of old school gaming versus new school gaming, and then we try to break that down. And those are about an hour long. Our live plays are we break them into chunks of about an hour. There's so many. So there's everybody knows about. I don't know. Do you know about Critical Role? Everybody seems to know about Critical Role.
Yeah.
So everybody knows about Critical Role is a 4-hour long recording, and real actors, real voice actors. I mean, they have their stuff together. And
Well, you got to if you're playing something like this. You're
Well,
telling me you get your character is a leprechaun or something. Go, hi. Oh, I got the 12 critical hit damage there, lassie. Like
that's not bad. That's a pretty good Irish
I'm
accent.
pretty good at
I'm
impressions. I'm not
horrible
gonna
at
lie.
Irish. I'm Irish. I would love all my halflings to be Irish, but I cannot touch an Irish accent. I cannot do it. It turns Scottish on me.
What's your favorite kind of voice that you play with your characters? Like obviously being the dungeon master, you're playing all the side characters and all. Like you
Yeah.
probably incorporate a main one yourself, or you just try and stick to the narrator.
We have a character right now in the game who I have one of the YouTube guys I watch, Boogie, who does Francis. I don't know if people have seen the Francis videos, but he has a bit of a lisp like this, and it's a character that he does, and it makes me laugh all the time. Anyways, I role play up this dwarven sage, this dwarven librarian, and I give him that. He talks with a lisp, and let's get into these books here and see what we can find out. And I have a lot of fun with him. He actually wrecked the table one night. My players did not know I was going to do that, and we started doing it. And then obviously fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons words and names can be incredibly long and difficult to say, and then to try to say them on top of that while you're trying to put sort of that out of the side of your mouth lispy voice to it. Oh, it was hard to pronounce. We were all in stitches. We had to. I actually think we paused the recording at one point because we weren't getting anything but just laughter. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, I'm not really. I don't do a lot of voices, but that one lately has been a lot of fun to do.
This is
So,
always what's kind of interesting to me about Dungeons and Dragons was I love that whole voice actor aspect of it. I always
mhm.
like doing impressions and stuff, and it's all on the basis of your characters. Like, how do you find the voice that best fits your characters is usually based on the description of the thing. If you're
Sure.
dealing with a giant monster or a giant orc, you want to have a kind of a deep burrow to it, like a more of
Yeah.
a grisly tone. And then if you're dealing with a smaller character, you have to do a more of a higher pitch or more of a feeble type accent to it,
Or you
depending
can
on what its statistics or abilities are.
turn that on its head and go the opposite, right? The big bulging orc that talks with a little voice like this,
Yeah,
and
like the big guy named Tiny, and you wonder,
yeah,
like,
exactly.
I'm looking for Tiny, and then all you
Yeah.
see, you turn around, there's like a 20-foot guy, but
And
shit.
people that come to play Dungeons and Dragons are sometimes intimidated by like the silly voices that sometimes are used. But I always tell people, like, that's entirely optional. I've played in games where no one uses silly voices. They pretty much just talk in their same voice. But I always tell people, it doesn't have to be a silly voice. You can just slow down the way you speak, or speak really fast, so that if you're a little guy, you can be just really talking fast, fast, fast. And if you can just play around with that, even you can find something that's comfortable for you, because not everybody you play with is an actor. I play with guys that come to the table. They're not there to role play. They're there to game.
Well, I feel
There's
like
there's
those
there,
subtle details that you throw into the game, I feel like that's
mhm.
what creates the overall atmosphere and gets everyone really dragged
Sure,
into it.
sure. But I've played with guys that's well, and girls too. I'm using guys sort of as a just
Pejoratively.
yeah, yeah. But the So someone introduced me recently to something called G and S theory. So a player falls into one of these categories, either G, N, or S, and they stand for gamer, narrative, and simulation. So there's some people that come to the table that want to game, and those people are, they want to roll the dice, they want to, battle the monster, they want to go through and pick a spell that has an effect on the table. They want to explore the dungeon. They're not there necessarily for character development or story. And then you have narrative players who are all about the story. Nothing's worse to them than when you get into the rules and the minutia of the game, whereas a gamer player enjoys that side of things. And then you have simulation players who they want everything to feel and act realistically.
Yeah, such as wearing props and things of this sort, like a hat or something. I know if you're placing me in a role that's supposed to be a Grandmaster Wizard, you bet your ass I'm getting a Gandalf great pipe and I'm smoking it.
Well, I would say those are narrative players. What I mean by simulation is, so if a spell, let's say a fireball goes off, so a big explosion of fire, if the DM then doesn't begin to describe that there's fires burning and there's the trees are on fire, as opposed to just, well, they take this much damage, and we don't really think about what would happen if a fireball like that went off. That's where a simulation player comes in. They want everything to feel and act in the game as real as they don't want anything that's not sort of they don't want fanciful stuff.
Like when we talk about like the ones that get all simulated into it, like are we talking about like if in a fireball hits, are we lighting curtains? I feel like that's where what
Well,
I
not necessarily in real life, but like in the game, they want this everything in the game and the story to feel like a simulation. Like, for instance, if you were to just read the rules, a fireball just says, it does this much damage and it hits this big a space.
Yeah, where's the fear factor? I want to feel like
Yeah.
I'm terrified here.
The simulation person, they want to know that that's doing structural damage, that's doing this, that's doing that. And lots of DMs include stuff like that in their games.
Yeah, like flames,
but not all of them.
Flames consume your wizard's robe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That paints a picture in my mind, much like reading a book or watching a movie. I like that whole simulation aspect. So now I have to throw a weird thought at your way. Imagine if they created, how like 4D movies,
yes,
where like they make you experience it. Imagine if they did that with Dungeons and Dragons. So like there'd be a heater under the table that you guys are playing on. So like if a fire hits or you're going near molten lava or something, they turn on the heater and keep turning it up until you start to feel it on your legs. You start to feel it sweaty.
There are more and more people doing stuff like that in their games, I find. One of the big introductions, I would say, in the last sort of 5 years into gaming has been sound, specifically like music, but even more than music, like sound effects. As dungeon masters have tablets and things like that behind their screens, they can use those there's all sorts of companies out there that supply sound effects now, so you can have soundboards for dungeons, so they can hear. You don't have to you can describe the dripping water, but then on top of that you can have dripping water sort of like filtering through in the background. There's lots of people that I've seen online that they, for some of their gaming nights, they do food to match. So if the party's going to be at an inn that's serving, I don't know, sausage, they're serving sausage to their
bitches.
Exactly, they're serving sausage to their friends. And props used at the table. I have a friend who really utilizes props well in his games, and we talked to him on the podcast about his use of props. And on top of that, he goes even a little bit further, and he started to learn these little sleight of hand magic tricks and that, and learning how to force certain choices so that he can do these magic tricks at the table. And then that really blows his players' minds. He was telling me, when he can sort of cause them to choose something that then later on they're like, was that chance or what happened there?
I think a lot what fascinates me about Dungeons and Dragons as well is the amount of creative kind of influences you can incorporate into the game, but also the figures as well that you get to use for your characters. Designing your
Yes.
own game board, it seems like the more you can, like, I see a lot of people that do Dungeons and Dragons or just do a podcast about it in general. The types of pieces they create, such as molding your own and crafting out your own little figurines to put on the board, and also creating your own map display as well. I think that makes it a lot much more easy for people that are a little bit less creative to be able to get hooked into the game.
That's
It
right.
seems
That's
like
right.
when you're relying on Dungeons and Dragons, it also really relies on your creativity as well. It doesn't have to be a price factor, just how far you can go with your imagination to truly get visualize and get hooked into the game.
Yeah, I have played with minimalists that it's just like the books and the dice at the table, and that's all we have. And then I have played where we have all kinds of miniatures. We have 3D dungeons that that they're for purchase or people make them, uh, and sort of the sky is the limit. Once you start spending it, the great thing about this hobby of gaming is that in many cases you have a choice of how much, like you can spend just enough to get yourself the rule book and some dice and you're good to play, or you can go, you can go one step further and one step further and one step further, and there's so much out there now. That's the other thing. Just sort of through the years of gaming, I've seen more and more and more stuff become available. Like there's custom tables you can get for gaming now. With my buddy actually has one where there's a drawer in front of each sort of setting, each seat, and you pull that drawer out and you've got a dice tray there for yourself, you've got a drink holder, you've got a dice holder, and the DM's end of the table where the dungeon master sits, I mean, his folds out and it's even a screen, a wooden screen that folds right over the table. It's incredible stuff. And with 3D printing as well, there's so much more that's being done at relatively good pricing, I think. But
Have you ever heard of the game Heroescape?
Heroes, yes, with
Yes.
the hexagon,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was my Dungeons and Dragons. I look, I tried to buy that game off Amazon now, and it's like 150 bucks
Okay,
for
do you want
just
to
like 3 pieces.
Heroescape? Here's the secret about Heroescape. So Heroescape went under. Like it's not made anymore.
Yeah,
So the Heroescape boards that are out there are the only boards that exist. There is a game called BattleTech. Now, some you might be familiar with Mech Warrior from video gaming,
yeah.
or even BattleTech in video games right now. I think Piranha Studios makes their games. But BattleTech, the tabletop game where it all started, uses hexagon map sheets, and the BattleTech guys will buy up that Heroescape like no tomorrow. Huge, huge, huge money spent on Heroescape collections, not for the miniatures that came with the game, just for that hexagon stacking ability of their grids, because it it suits the BattleTech game, which BattleTech is played on grids, and it has level 1, level 2, level 3. So just the way you can stack that Heroescape stuff, it's a perfect fit for that game. And BattleTech guys will spend hundreds of dollars to get their hands on Heroescape.
Heroescape was such a fascinating game because it incorporated so many. I remember me and my brother would always like set it up in the room and everything. He would go angels and demons and do these types of he would like trade his with friends that he went to school with. He's older than me, so he had
Hmm.
always a little bit better figures than I did. But I stuck to the basics, man. Cowboys, monks. I
Hmm.
have the few occasional like wizards or something in the back. Archers obviously lined up at a point, but it was the whole strategy fascination that it started inspiring and getting as a kid that made me try and find that more like as I became older with
So
the
that entrance into role playing is when I was talking about gamer narrative and simulation. That that is the gamer side of Dungeons and Dragons. Get the pieces out, get the board set up. Uh, that's where gamers thrive. So a lot of people, and that's where the game comes from. I mean, the game was originally just sort of a medieval warfare, and then you went from controlling units down to just controlling one person, and then story sort of got added in after. So a lot of guys like myself come from an age where gaming was the way you played the game. Having a story, having a simulation, those things came after. But just sort of the pieces and the dice and moving around and fighting monsters, that's sort of where that's where my fascination at least began with it. Now, I didn't even play with many miniatures when I was a kid. We played with basically just pencil, paper, and the books. But it was that grid and moving, eventually starting to move like little lead soldiers and that around it. And I remember as kids we would use dominoes to make dungeon walls, and we would play in
Really
adventures
relying
like
on your
that.
creativity, where kind of
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
buying expensive
Absolutely.
things wasn't an option.
Well, and they didn't make them back then. I mean, the, gaming was such a niche community that there was no market. If you had made 3D dungeons back then, nobody would have bought them because there wasn't a big enough market for it. But now, I mean, as gaming explodes bigger and bigger, and not just Dungeons and
Well,
Dragons,
we
there's
hit a
all
new trend too. I mean, back in the
yeah.
day when Heroescapes, when I was playing that, I remember the one fantasy shop I ever went to was like a few states away in Baltimore, Maryland, where I'm in
Hmm.
Ocean City, Maryland, and there was near the Owings Mills Mall. My grandmom takes us in there, and of course, like she's supposed to be buying a school clothing. So I will admit, at one point, I bought a fedora, and I regret that decision ever since. Mostly because I thought, like, oh,
Do
these are
you still
cool.
have it? Do you still have it?
Hell no, dude. It
Oh.
had it had skulls on it. I don't know what I was like. I look at her now. I'm like, you let me wear that? She's like, you were so stylish. I was like, oh no, no, like burn it. Maybe it's back in the
Oh.
time, like having that, like, oh my God, I think I wore it one day to school and I was like, oh, this isn't for me. But you know, when we were getting clothes shopping, we walked by the fantasy shop and I went in there and I said, like, whoa, like this is something I've never seen before. And to see all the models and everything that was built up, it's where, the one thing that's always stayed constant, it seems like, is always people had a fascination with Legos. I had
Yeah.
those as a kid as well, but those have always been able to be bought in Walmart and all these types of things. But when
Hmm.
it came to buying fantasy board collectible items or just hobby shops in general, like building models, there's some in Walmart. But when it comes to those collectible gaming type stuff, like when I went to this mall, it was all over the place, and now it's all starting to pop up everywhere.
Oh yeah, yeah. And the big trend now is not only is it to have a gaming store where you can buy all your gaming stuff, but gaming stores need to have playable space where people can meet, congregate, and play. That seems to be the big one. Is that it's not enough just to have a store anymore. You need to kind of build a culture as well where people can come in and play. I know that our local store here, we have Wednesday nights as our D&D night at the store. I DM there, and we have another guy that DMs there, and that's like you meet so many new people, and that's one of the great things about this hobby is the number of people that I have met. And in an age where less and less FaceTime stuff is happening, like where you have this sort of a disconnect, everything is texting or digital. The great thing about this game and games like it is that it brings a group of people together. They're literally there looking at one another. You can reach out and touch one another. There's a sort of a
A
I don't know.
camaraderie aspect.
Yeah, I would even go so far as to use the term intimacy. There's sort of this intimacy that the table is everybody's there at the table and it's their little world, and something that they can all share. And it's totally it's not I say it's totally unplugged. I realize that people can use apps and things like that in the game, but for the most part it's unplugged. You're rolling dice, you're talking, you're right there. So I think that's such a cool idea.
What would you say the common core factor or element played into it becoming so popular nowadays? I feel like it had to be an influence with the way movies and technology kind of bring that aspect into it as well. Much like and also where technology has gotten, it's gotten us to a point where it seems like having a passion for video games or something that it's turned into a trend now.
I think podcasting and streaming are one of the biggest reasons that this hobby has grown in the last little while. I think I meet so many people. I have a girl that plays at my table every Wednesday at the store right now that knew nothing about Dungeons and Dragons, watched Critical Role, watched Critical Role, and there was a podcast she was listening to of a live play, and that was enough for her to come to the store and go, "How do I get involved?" And now she's been playing with us for 2 years. So that I think people the nice thing about streaming is that you can sit down and watch a Dungeons and Dragons stream, and there's you're anonymous, so you can check out the game because there's still those stigmas out there. Some people still remember the stigmas of old of Dungeons and Dragons and things, but here they have an opportunity. They can watch a real game get played, and there's no judgment. They can just watch it and walk away. But I think once they watch it and see what it really is, there's a fascination to it. Everybody likes storytelling. There's something sort of primitive in that like at some point we all sat around fires telling one another stories, and now Dungeons and Dragons is just sort of that to just ramped up. Like you're essentially just sitting around telling a story, but we've just given it some rules and some dice so that we don't know how the story is going to end, whereas storytellers of old obviously knew how their stories would end. But yeah, I think that's what everybody likes to tell stories. I think everybody would have liked Dungeons and Dragons long ago, but they didn't have accessibility, and things like podcasting and streaming has given that accessibility that they can go, "Oh, well, I love telling a story," or "I love listening to a story," because we have lots of players that come to the table. They want to play the game, but they're not there so much to be the main character. They're there to just watch the story unfold and be a part of it at whatever level they're comfortable with. So if they're just comfortable being like a secondary character, then they're at the table and they're a secondary character. They're not grabbing that spotlight all the time, but they're still having a great time because they're there to watch that story unravel. And I think that's what podcasting and streaming has given people the chance to take a look at it and then decide for themselves whether they want to try it. And I think for the most part, once they've watched it, they want to try it.
I definitely think that each person pulls something unique from watching a podcast or seeing it be done. First of all, like for me, someone that doesn't understand anything about the game, talking to someone like you is only furthering my wanting to be able to play the game. First of all, I have so many friends that tell me, like, come on, just join us. And it gets so crazy how long their sessions last, too. Like, they'll shut their phones off at in the middle of the day and they won't answer it till very late at night. Sorry, I was just in a Dungeons and Dragons game. I'm like,
Sure.
it lasted 7 hours.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
anybody get
And
up to
again,
this at all?
again, if you're someone listening to this and you've never played Dungeons and Dragons before, like Rob, you're that's not always how the game plays. You could find a group of players that play, my game at the store lasts 3 hours, which is still a long time for some people. That's a lot of time to commit. But a 3-hour little chunk is much more like if you went to watch a movie nowadays, it's not uncommon for movies to go for 3 hours. So if I could sit you down at a table and give you entertainment value equal to a movie in a story that you were actually involved with, would that be worth your time to sit down for 3 hours? And in a lot of people's case, it's yes. And I think that there are still obviously there are people like your friends, and I occasionally, when I get the opportunity, will do a long session like that. But I don't think all sessions have to be these 8-hour, 12-hour marathons that you hear about. They can be much smaller. I've run 2-hour sessions. I've never gone much below 2 hours. Usually 2 hours is enough time, especially for a new player. It gives them a little time to figure out the game and then a little time to play with the mechanics that they've just figured out. But
It's funny from doing the podcast, all my friends try and get me in as their dungeon master. They're like, dude, the way your mind takes all these twists and turns, you would go all out on this. I'm like, maybe I might want to try it because I do want to be involved as well. I do
Oh,
want to be a character, but I feel like as a dungeon master, the fact that you're being the narrator, it's very, very
yes.
difficult to set yourself into the story without trying to favor yourself over the others.
And a dungeon master is a little bit more than just the narrator. Like they tend to be, they're the rules. They're the guy or girl that's going to set what rules to follow and what what turns the story is going to take. A good dungeon master is usually someone who's good at storytelling, is good at improving on the spot, and I like a dungeon master that has a good grasp of the rules. They don't have to know every rule. I'm not at all saying that. Dungeons and Dragons can be very communally learned if one person can't get all the rules down. But and the great thing about if the greatest thing about the newest edition of Dungeons and Dragons, which is the 5th edition, the rules are so streamlined and quick to grasp. That was not always the case with Dungeons and Dragons, but right now, that's another reason that this Dungeons and Dragons renaissance that's currently happened because you have the streaming, you have the podcasting, you are reaching more people with the game, and on top of that, the game is so streamlined right now and easy to enter that everybody was just like jumping on board to get their nails into it. So
See, I feel
yeah,
like
if you've
if
never played, you need to play. If nothing else, you should play. You should just play a game so that you have an honest opinion or some honest thoughts about like this is what I like about it or this is what I didn't like. It was just too much of this or too little of that. But again, knowing that like if you get into a game,
I know this is gonna take me down the road of joining LARPing. I know it for a fact. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I've always wanted to try LARPing. Like when I play Skyrim, Oblivion, or World of
yes.
Warcraft, like I go insane with it.
Do you
Like
cosplay?
No, I don't.
Okay.
My buddy keeps trying to drag me to Comic Con. I'm a big fitness freak, so he had this Comic Con coming up, and he's like, "Bro, I want to get fit, and I want to do this. I want to walk up like Skyrim characters. I want us to do this together." I'm like, "I already have a six pack." I'm like, This is just an excuse for me to take my shirt off. Should I just say I'm Leonidas and start walking around?" And I'm not that type of guy at all, but I'm like, this is where I enjoy it. And I actually one of my very I used to do a spinoff of this podcast called Fill in the Blank where we focused on like specific topics. But one of the first ones I did was on Comic Con.
Oh,
And
okay.
I was talking about all the stigma behind it, how all these people were rioting, saying these people were weirdos or they were homophobic or something, that they were
Yeah.
rioting because all these people dressing up, they thought it was something that was against like satanic or something. I'm like, but it's not though. It's people that are trying to look up to their characters instead of
It's
looking up
that
to
it's that
celebrities. You're looking up
geeking
to
out
yeah.
geeking out to a fandom. It's like getting so uh enthralled by the stories or the whatever it is, whether it be video games or
And being surrounded by
movies,
people that share that
books.
same passion as
Exactly,
well.
exactly. And you don't need to worry about like I don't cosplay either. I don't LARP. I have never I've never LARPed in my,
Dude, I
let's
will
see,
pay anybody to let me
40
dress up as a knight and beat the crap out of them with a foam sword.
so I played D&D for 35 years. When I was 11 or 12, I had this conversation with my mother. Uh, we were sort of in the midst of the Dungeons and Dragons satanic craze, where everybody was worried that kids were dying to this game uh, because somehow the game was causing it. And my mother made me promise her that I would never. She didn't know it was called LARPing. I didn't know at the time it was called LARPing. I'd never heard of it. But basically, she was like, "It's fine that you roll your dice and pen, paper, your little miniatures, but I don't want you going somewhere and acting this out." And so I had to make a pact with my mom at that point that uh, that wasn't going to change. That I was going to, I was going to continue essentially what I would call tabletop gaming as opposed to LARPing. So I've I've always been curious about LARPing, but I've never taken that plunge. And I always tell people, I think back to that conversation with my mother. She was so worried. I think she was happy that I was playing Dungeons and Dragons because, on a Saturday night, her teenager was always either at a friend's house or on her dining room table. I mean, I had friends over playing Dungeons and Dragons all the time on weekends.
Yeah, you're not
So
going out and doing anything
she
big.
didn't have to worry about me, what I was doing. She knew where I was, and I was so obsessed with the game that she was like, if I told her I was going to a friend's to play Dungeons and Dragons, she knew I was going to a friend's to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I feel like, so she liked the game from that standpoint, but she was worried that I was going to, that if I started LARPing, which again, she didn't know it was called LARPing. I didn't either, but she was worried that that was going to take me down this other path.
I mean, first of all, they sell a Ouija board at Toys R Us.
Mm-hmm.
It ranges
Mm-hmm.
from you have to be above 8 years old to play the game. So you have to be 8 years old to summon the devil. So
I have never used a Ouija board.
I haven't either, because there was always that stigma from our parents, like, oh, it's learning how to summon the devil. I think that's what relates it to Dungeons and Dragons when you start talking about spells and the types.
My
of
father claims to have had an experience with a Ouija board that he has never touched a Ouija board again. I think this was in his late teens, early 20s, and he told me that he won't tell me what it was about or what was asked, but my dad is a funeral director. He's retired now, but he was a funeral director for profession, and he I forget how we got on the topic about Ouija boards, but it was really funny to see his reaction. He was like, "Nope, I don't do it. I don't touch that."
summoning the devil. That's all it is.
Something happened, and he won't talk about it.
I think with like Dungeons and Dragons, like, and it kind of with LARPing as well. Have you ever seen the movie Role Models
Have I seen the movie Role Model?
with what's his name? Oh my God, it's gonna kill me. Paul Rudd, the guy that played Stifler, Scott McKinley, I think his last name is.
Yeah.
Okay, they
I don't
had
think-
there was the dude that played in Superbad, McLovin, that guy.
Yeah.
His name was Augie in it, and it was like it's called this thing called Sturdy Wings. Basically, you have to be a big brother to a kid that doesn't have anybody to look up to or guide them or show them things, or just have a friend really.
Okay.
One of the kids was obsessed with LARPing, so he made capes and made costumes and all this stuff in there. And towards the end of the movie, my dad's a big Kiss fanatic, so they incorporated Kiss into the movie. And the dude got separated from one of the like there were 4 factions, and he got separated from the faction. He wasn't allowed in any of the others, and they made their own faction called Kiss My Anthea. And they dressed up like the 4 leaders of Kiss. And my dad paused the movie while we're watching it, looks over at me, and goes, "Look, if you ever want to do LARPing and you do something like this, I'm in." I'm like, oh shit. Like, that's where a lot of my fascination came from too, because like, I mean, how many times did you go out in the yard with your friends with sticks and just like sword fight or do something
sure.
like karate? Karate was okay doing it like that. But if you start playing it in like, oh, I'm a wizard or something, that becomes nerdy. I'm like, how? It's the same shit.
Yeah. I can remember playing like ninjas and samurais and
You bet your ass I was on the front yard playing as a Power Ranger. I did that for sure.
Oh, my son just you know what, that's one of the things that I kind of like. He's bought into certain fandoms too, and my middle son, he is a Power Ranger fanatic, and it's sort of older than him, so I was surprised that he gripped onto it, but he loves it. We got to go to Fan Expo in Toronto, and I'm not going to remember his name, but the Green Ranger was there. My son got to have a picture with the Green Ranger. Tommy, I don't know the actor's name. You know who I'm talking about?
I do, yeah.
And he has that picture on his wall. It's like a shrine. Yeah, no. Power Rangers are a big deal here at my household.
I think this is what is awesome about fandoms in general. Like, you want to talk about Comic-Con and stuff, how people can dress up to idolize for someone that they idolize and try and impersonate them or be them.
Yeah.
It gives them that fantasy. That's better than looking up to celebrities like a lot of people do on Instagram.
I agree.
These are a fascination thing about Comic-Con, where when I see it and a lot of people dismiss it like you're a weirdo if you go, I'm like, the amount of creativity, the amount of overall work and effort and passion that gets put into designing the costumes. My buddy did one for Naruto, and he painted his whole body in black paint and then did white skeleton bones in explicit design. I mean, something that was like, it took hours and hours and hours, then designing his own props and going all out towards it. I'm not saying you always have to do that to go, but to see how passionate he was about it. He's like, "Hey man, can you drive me?" I'm like, "What do you mean drive you?" He's like, I'll mess up the paint if I try and drive with this stuff."
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
wow, like just to see someone go that far into it really is where like the fascination with LARPing comes from as well. It's why I see when I see older people that do like LARPing or I see something like that. It, for a lot of people, they don't get it. They just think they're a bunch of goofballs. But towards the end of the movie, role models, even the guy that was sitting there making fun of it the whole time, like he goes, "Give me your hat," and the king's like, "What? You cannot take the king's hat." And he's like, "Give me your hat. Give me your hat. Give me your crown." He tries to take it from him, and they tie him to a lamp post or whatever, a light post, because he's supposed to be in like exiled or whatever. And he's literally sitting there, Paul Rudd is, with just a blank look on his face, like this is bullshit. And he's not even tied up; he's imaginary tied up. So he's just sitting
Yeah.
there for like an hour with his arms behind the pole, and then the truck pulls up, and he goes, "Oh, thank God!" And he moves his arms, breaks freeze of it, and jumps right in the truck. Like there's people that come at it like that, but towards the end of the movie, you saw like he was going really into it. He dressed up like Star Child. He freaking went all out. He was when he got hit in the arm, he would put his arm behind his back like he lost a limb, and he was acting it out and everything. It's because when you truly let all the stigmatized stuff and all what people are going to think of you or what you might look like to someone that's just driving by, and you just choose to be free and like I guess be a kid again, but
Sure, sure.
not even really be a kid. Just let that creativity and let's just express yourself. It's
There's
the
a
best
there's
form.
an opportunity to escape in all of this. Like there's an opportunity to escape all the bullshit of uh of this sort of uh
Life's whole.
culture, society, everything, to just be in someone else's skin. And like even though I don't LARP, like one of the greatest things about Dungeons and Dragons for me, and I would say majority of my friends, is a good game usually has really hard decisions in it. There's not a right or wrong decision. It's like, do we take this road? Do we take this road in the story? And which one's going to be the better road to take? And I'm talking figuratively, not a literal road here. But I think when you have games with like hard decisions like that, and then you have to make a decision and then see where that decision goes without worrying. So in the real world, when you go to work, when you go to a family function or whatever, sure, these decisions crop up too, but there's so much stress because like if you make a wrong choice, then there's judgment or there's failure. And I realize that that a, a person who's reached a higher level is not going to be worried about that. You learn from your failures, you learn from your mistakes. But the simulation of the game and being able to choose a direction to go with the story with no consequence once the story's done, like you just walk away, there's something really freeing about that. And it gives you an opportunity to sort of leave all the other worries of the world behind, because just for that moment you're at the table and the choices you make have no ramification once the table's done playing, which is really, there's a sort of freedom to that.
Life's too short to never truly be free.
This is true. This is true.
Well, Jeremy, thanks so much for doing the podcast, man. It's awesome talking to you. I want to give you here a minute at the end to kind of promote your content so people can find your podcast and everything.
Well, I would challenge you to take up your friend's offer and play Dungeons and Dragons.
I definitely am probably going to have to. I mean,
Even if it's just once to get to see if it's right for you. But yeah, I think you should do that.
I know I'm going to get so much out of it, and I guarantee you I'm going to end up trying to do LARPing as well. I've searched in my area for people that have been LARPing too.
There's usually LARP groups. If you look online, there's usually a couple in the area.
Yeah, I keep getting pointed towards Craigslist, but there's some weird stuff on Craigslist.
Craigslist is a whole different yeah. No, I think you should try it. If for no other reason to go, okay, it's not my cup of tea. But I don't, from what you're saying, I think it'll be your cup of tea. I think you'll like it.
It's definitely going to be. It's going to be what leads me into an era where I just start building a log cabin and stuff. I know it. I go all out when it comes to those things, dude.
That's good. I'm similar. Once I decide I'm going to do something, like I go all in on it. I don't sort of only dip a toe. I have to go headlong in.
Yeah, when I put paprika on my salad, there's no like, oh, just a dash. There's just dumping half the thing on there to the point you can your mouth's just on fire the whole time.
So as far as my stuff is concerned, there is oldmenrollingdice.com, which is our podcast. On a side note, I also have dmjeremy.com, which is more of my personal projects. There's a fundraising project I do on there that involves Dungeons, Dragons, and cystic fibrosis. And then my other project is the podcast, The Old Men Rolling Dice. So those are sort of the two places that you can find me. And yeah, if you'd like to check out an episode of people playing Dungeons and Dragons, I would invite you to check out Old Men Rolling Dice.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.